And listen, man, what about to kick off the card with, man? The Immortal Matt Brown, excuse me. He opens up as a plus 145 underdog to Dhiego Lima as a minus 170 favorite. And I need to ask you off the bat, AJ, you shaking your head a little bit. You seem to disagree just slightly. What do you think about the odds going into these fights with a 40-plus-year-old Matt Brown and like a 33-year-old Dhiego Lima?
I think it comes into the fact of why Matt Brown is an underdog is that age. You just talked about it. 40 years old. He's a little older of a dude, and really, I mean, his nickname stands true, man. Matt Brown is immortal. This dude, even in his last fight against Carlos Condit, he might have lost it, but he was grinding it out. He was winning the first round for the majority of the time until Carlos Condit was able to flip it around and get the position and really start to take over the fight. But man, Matt Brown, this dude has been a long time killer in the game. And personally, I was just shaking my head on that because watching Matt Brown fight Carlos Condit versus Dhiego Lima fight Belal Muhammad, I was way more impressed with how Matt Brown was able to hand himself than how Dhiego Lima was acting against Belal Muhammad. Don't get me wrong, Belal Muhammad, an amazing fighter, hella pressure, and probably fought his best fight against Dhiego Lima. Yeah. But I was a little underwhelmed with how Dhiego Lima was going about it. He wasn't really necessarily firing off as many kicks as I was expecting. I expected him to be long, lanky, maintaining reach. And it just kind of got pressured and kind of got stuffed, really, and wasn't able to fight like I thought Dhiego Lima was going to fight. What do you think, Derek? Do you think the odds are representative of what's going on?
I was a little surprised, to be honest, because I felt the same way about Dhiego Lima's last performance against Belal Muhammad. And what's really interesting is I was watching Matt Brown in his pre-fight presser, and he was basically saying how impressed he was of Dhiego Lima. And I know, you know what I'm saying? I was like, yo, like, okay, that's interesting. But then there's the caveat of these two know each other. They actually used to train together, and they know each other very, very well. And there's a lot of respect between these two. So for that reason, I believe that's what Matt Brown is saying. He was more of saying, like, once he gets his mental stuff together in the cage, you don't know how good this dude is because he's killing people in the gym. Like, I think it's very common knowledge at this point, right, AJ, that there's a lot of legit fighters who train at a Dhiego Lima gym. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if it's American Top Team Dhiego Lima. I think that's what it is. But there's a lot of people who train, you know, under Dhiego Lima at his gym and whatnot. So this dude, I mean, really the main issue that I see for him is volume, right? He's always kind of had an issue with volume. And I did a little bit of math, man. He averages 43 significant strikes in all of his 4 UFC wins. He averages 17 significant strikes in his 6 UFC losses. So that's one of those big things is like you got to let your hands go, man. Because versus Belal Muhammad, which is the thing we keep referencing, right? It just seemed like he just would not let his hands go. He had a good jab. He has nice kicks, nice calf kicks. But you just got to let it go more. You know what I mean? You're going to get outpointed. But with that being said, man, let's actually talk about this a little bit. Matt Brown, right? We already know the elbows. You got to stay away from that. That's the money shot, right? He got big overhand. But there's something that I think people aren't going to expect about this matchup because they're also noting, Matt Brown noted, there's no way that this fight won't be a bloodbath. I disagree. I think that Matt Brown's going to try to wrestle in this fight. I think that actually might be his best bet at winning this fight is by trying to grapple and trying to wrestle. Let's just note this, AJ. Matt Brown, he has the most fights in the welterweight division history in UFC at 27. He has the second most wins at 170 pounds with 15. BJJ brown belt, judo brown belt. How does he face up against the BJJ brown belt who is Dhiego Lima? And are you surprised to hear that Dhiego Lima is a brown belt given how little he uses his jiu-jitsu in the cage?
Not really surprised because I do know they're working, especially with his brother Douglas Lima, excuse me. They're working that constantly. The ground game is definitely there. I'm a little more surprised that I think Matt Brown, what he's saying about that, it's going to be a bloodbath, is really just a little bit more press. Because I definitely think 100% that he's going to be shooting for the takedowns whenever they can, controlling that top mount, position over submission, beat up Dhiego Lima, especially because we haven't seen. And don't get me wrong, Dhiego Lima has really good takedown defense, but he was able to get taken down by Belal Muhammad. Whereas if Matt Brown's going to be doing that constant full pressure, I think Matt Brown's the bigger of the fighter. I think he's going to be able to control the fight a lot more than against Carlos Condit. Now, what I think the biggest problem, again, with Dhiego Lima, and going back to what you were saying, Derek, is the consistency or the output that he's putting forward. If he's throwing those leg kicks all day, like the Limas that we're used to seeing the Limas do, I don't necessarily know if it's going to be the biggest problem for Matt Brown to be pressuring off the front foot, shooting for takedowns. I think his mobility will be a little hindered. And then that way we can actually see Dhiego Lima pick him apart from the outside. And maybe he might even get to utilize the ground game, but I mean, I'm not surprised just because he's been a long-time fighter. I don't know exactly when Lima's been fighting since, but he's got to be working that ground game to stay at this elite level for that long. Were you surprised to hear that exact thing?
I was just surprised just because, like I said, I was like, that's not indicative of what I'm watching. You know what I mean? I hear what you're saying. And oftentimes, a lot of fighters, we have to be honest about this, right? They don't speak objectively. They speak very biased, and they talk about, oh, I personally enjoy this, or there's this bond, or I don't want to disrespect the man. That was a big thing Matt Brown was saying. He was like, there's no disrespect whatsoever between this. I will say this, man. You mentioned it, Dhiego Lima. Oftentimes, people put the pressure on him. That's one of his kind of flaws, is that they put the pressure on him and then they put him on his butt. Now, recently, he's really shored up some of that takedown defense. He has a career overall takedown defense of about 73%, which is what's going to make this interesting because he's also taller than Matt Brown. And one thing that we know is that when you're trying to scoop that single leg on a taller opponent, they got that post right there and they can always land back on it. With that being said, AJ, Lima doesn't necessarily fight well against pressure fighters. However, I mean, Matt Brown, even though he's a pressure fighter, this dude is old, man. And I don't want to hate. He's immortal. I love it. But what are the odds that Father Time catches up to not really both. I guess Matt Brown. Is this a loser leaves town matchup, man? I feel like both of these fighters are I was just very confused why this fight got matched up in the first place. You know what I'm saying? So is this a loser leaves town matchup to you?
It feels like it, doesn't it? It really does feel like both Matt Brown and Dhiego Lima are kind of on their last limbs, both having losses in their last fights. It's really not looking like there's a lot of greener pasture going forward, at least. I definitely feel like it's a little more that way for Matt Brown, more so than Dhiego Lima. But, I mean, the Immortal's here to stay, so you're going to have to do a lot to actually get him out. But, yeah, man, it feels like this is one of those Dana White chopping block situations that we need to see a good performance, or else we're going to see some cuts coming soon.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm just going to point this out really quickly. I was just reading this before we started recording and whatnot. But Emil Meek, are you familiar with Emil Meek?
Sounds familiar.
So he's like Viking, he's the dude who does all the Viking stuff, right? He lost 3 fights in a row, right? And that's not what these dudes are on. That's not what I'm saying. But he's no longer under UFC contract. And I was very surprised because his 3 opponents were, I believe it was Jake Matthews, Bartosz Fabinski, excuse me, and Kamaru Usman. And then it's like you're not under contract after something like that. So it's crazy. So yeah, I definitely think that's kind of the case here, because my other question to you, AJ, before we kind of give our picks on this one is what is left for Matt Brown to prove at this point? You know what I mean? Like he said he was like, the only thing I'm really chasing is I don't want to get humiliated. But like, I still don't think that I've gotten my best performance yet. And it's like, it's chasing the dragon. You're at 40 years old, bro. You're never going to get that best performance. But with that being said, is there anything left to prove for Matt Brown?
I was trying to ponder exactly that. I haven't thought about this question yet, and I think he answered it best. It's more so he's chasing ego. He's chasing that dragon, that high of fighting that we all love. And the one thing that comes to mind when talking about it is Paul Felder, where he's saying, I'd rather quit early than late. And I think we're on that later side of Matt Brown's quitting season, where he's kind of starting to hit the heel end downfall a little bit. You hate to see it, but I would love to see him chase one more big, crazy bloodbath knockout. That would be amazing. I think that might be the only thing he's chasing. Besides, like I said, his ego.
Yeah, basically at this point, just leave it all in the cage, right? Leave it all in the cage, and may the best man win. But with that being said, AJ, the really key factor that makes this fight interesting to me is the amount of experience both of these fighters have and how well they know each other. Because it could be kind of like that Gilbert Burns Kamaru Usman, where he's like, bro, I know I've dropped you in training. I know what works on you. You know what I'm saying? So it'll be interesting to see how both of these fighters execute their game plan. With that being said, AJ, it's time for the picks. Who do you have and why?
Man, I'm going. This was one of the hard picks for me to actually solidify in my own brain, but I'm going Matt Brown by decision. I think it's going to be a grinder of a fest. I think it's going to be a lot more takedowns than they're leading on. Maybe not as much blood, but I definitely think it's going to be a grinder of a pace, really back and forth. Lima from the outside, Matt Brown coming up under the middle, getting on the cage, taking him down, sitting on his butt, and really grinding out the decision win, going to Matt Brown, the Immortal. Hopefully it's one hell of a banger and he can end on a high note. Who you got and why?
So I'm kind of thinking the same thing, man. I'm thinking Dhiego Lima is going to be on his bike, lots of movement around that cage. Matt Brown's going to be probably chasing him and not cutting off the ring like he should, probably chasing him around. We're probably going to see Bilal Muhammad versus Dhiego Lima number 2, except I do expect Matt Brown to get maybe one of those double legs or something. A couple of those takedowns have to work because I believe Dhiego Lima stuffed like 6 of 9 takedowns from Bilal Muhammad in that fight. So with that being said, I'm going Matt Brown. I'm going a decision victory, but I think it could be close, man. I definitely think it could be interesting. But